Hello YouTube, and welcome to another Virtual Worlds tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to be covering the basics of terrain creation as well as terrain manipulation and painting foliage onto our terrain with free assets from the marketplace created by Epic Games themselves. Okay, let's get started. First thing you want to do is get some free assets for the foliage. So what I recommend you do is open Epic Launcher, and by default you'll be in the Unreal Engine up here with a tab. Click on Marketplace. When it loads up, click in your search and type in open space world. Then it should bring down a drop down. Oh no, I just put world and it's already recognised it, but I spelled it wrong. Click on, then it should come up with open world demo collection. Click on that, it'll bring up one result, and as you can see it's open world demo collection. It's been rated nearly 5 stars. I already own it and it's free. So what we want to do is click on that. Then it should take you to this page where it says add to cart. Mine says add to project because I've already downloaded it. You add to cart, you click on cart, then it'll be in your project files. You no need to pay for it or any credit card required because it's free. Then you click add to project, and then whatever project you want it, the foliage to be associated with, you go ahead and double click that. It's compatible with most versions of Unreal Engine 4. My file will be back from the dead. I've already got it installed, so I don't need to bother installing it. So we'll close that down. And then come to your Unreal Engine, load up a new project, create a new project, sorry. So go to create new level and choose default. You can go ahead and create an empty level, but you'll have to do the lighting yourself. It's just quicker to choose a default level. Go ahead and click the mesh, delete that. And then what you want to do, we'll create our basic terrain. Click on terrain, landscape in the modes tab, and then you've got two options, create new and import from file. We're going to be using create new because import from file, you import a height map and it will render that instead. We haven't got a height map in this tutorial, and I already have another tutorial covering height maps with a free download of a height map. Go ahead and check that out if you want to use height maps. In this tutorial we're going to be creating a new terrain, so we click on new, make sure materials left unchecked, and your location, Z and Y axis should be default value to 0 with Z on 100. Your rotation should be X, Y and Z at 0, and your scale should be default to on the X, Y and Z value at 100. Go ahead and leave the scale value alone, don't touch that because it can cause awful terrain artifacts. If you don't know what you're doing, leave scale as it is. Then section size, you're going to want to click on this and choose 127 by 127 quads, 2 by 2 sections for sections per component, number of components 16 by 16. Then you should have an overall resolution of 4065 by 4065. Total components 256. That's quite optimized, and it should be quite a large level to work with. And make sure you're under the manage. If you don't see this screen, make sure you're under the manage tab up here under the landscape. Then click create new. You can see this grid here. That's where our terrain is going to go. And you can see the number of components here, the squares and whatnot. Just click create. Give it a few seconds to load in. There you go. That's our terrain. It's quite a big area, as you can see. Don't worry about the black lines in squares around the terrain. That's just because I haven't built lighting. What you can do if you want to get rid of that, just go to build, click build lighting only. I can't do that because I've set my lighting to light propagation volume, dynamic lighting, and you don't build that, it's already pre-computed. But if you're baking UVs and light maps into your game, you can go ahead and click build lighting and the black lines will disappear. You always have to bear with it now because I can't build lighting because I've got light propagation volume. And then what you want to do, make sure you've got your landscape selected, and then you've got manage. If you click on manage, you can clear component selection, change your overall brush size, and your selection tool for selecting objects, adding, deleting, move to level. Usually you don't want to come in there. Edit splines is very useful. If you've got spline assets like roads that you can make bend around corners and whatnot and edit them along the trajectory point, but we're not going to be covering that. But make sure you're in sculpt, and then you've got sculpt tool. If you've got sculpt tool by default allows you to create bumps and dips. Smooth will smooth the terrain. Flatten will flatten it. Then you've got ramp, erosion, hydro erosion, add noise to your level, and just don't worry about the rest. The ones you're going to want to mainly use is sculpt, smooth, and flatten, with a little bit of erosion if you're doing mountains. Go ahead and leave it on smooth. That's not actually going to be smooth. If you want smooth terrain, you've got to click on the sculpt and click on smooth. And then what you should have is your tool strength. That's the higher the number, one's the maximum. That means how much of the effect to be applied to the brush. One being maximum, which means you'll have full effect. If you're finding, I'll show you in just a second. Brush size, obviously how big the brush is. The maximum is 8,192. As you can see, it's the biggest you can get. The brush fall off is if we shrink it down to 0, you can see it's got no fall off. If you got to 1, the maximum, you've got plenty of fall off. What fall off does is allows a nice transition between you sculpting. If you're painting terrain and you're painting layers, what it would do is it blend 2 layers or 3 layers, whatever how many layers you're covering, a lot more nicely. You won't have such a hard edge between joining textures. So we'll go ahead and set our brush size, say something like 2300, and our brush fall off. We don't want it to affect too much, so we don't want to make massive terrain. We just want to make some small hills. We'll go ahead and set it on 3.8 or something. Leave use clay brush alone. And now, since we're on sculpt, if we go ahead and click left click, we can see it getting bigger and bigger. And if we hold shift, it'll dip the terrain, it'll go in. So shift is to create dips and holes in the terrain, and without shift it will create hills. That's on the sculpt tool. And what you can do, if you can click that and click smooth, and as you can see, it's now smoothing those hard edges that the sculpt tool created. So it's creating a more natural look. So you can see we've still got the dip if we go up quite close, but now it looks like you would see in real life. It wouldn't look like this. And if you do it to your terrain, see, it's obviously, if you think that's affecting it too much, like the smoothing's applied too much, and it's shrinking it down way too much, you click the tool strength. We've got it on maximum 1. So if we click it on very small amount, now when we click on it, you can see it's having less of an effect. That's the basics of terrain manipulation. We can do smooth and erosion. Say these were your mountains, then you click on that. Can you see what it does there? It gives a nice angular definition that mountains have, and when you combine it with layers, like a mountain rock texture, it'll look pretty good. So you can just keep doing that to your heart's content. But we're not going to be covering layering terrain today, because I already have another tutorial for that, so go ahead and watch that if you want to know how to paint terrain. That's the basics of terrain manipulation. There's not too much to it, and it's quite easy to use. It's very intuitive. If you did have layers, you click on paint, and it'll appear down here when you set it up properly. Go ahead and watch my other tutorial on terrain in the UE4 playlist if you want to learn how to paint layers. The video is about 33 minutes long. Alright, now the fun part, foliage. What we can do to set up your foliage, click on this tab up here, foliage, click on that, and then what you've got your brush size, which is obviously your raw brush size for everything, your paint density, always leave it on 1. If you've got 4 foliages set up and you've got all 4 selected, that's the overall paint density for all 4 of them, or how many you've got selected. I always leave it on 1 by default and change the properties on the individual mesh for paint density. I always leave the overall paint density on 1. It just works out better that way. And the erase density is how strong the erase will be when you hold shift and you click on erase. Then what you want to do is locate the assets you downloaded from Marketplace by Epic Games, and it should be called Kite Demo. Click on Kite Demo down here in your content browser, and to get access easily to all static meshes, and we only want to see static meshes, click on your filters tab and we'll filter for static mesh. Click on static mesh, and as you can see, in the root directory of kite demo, you select them, select static mesh. It'll only show the static meshes from all the folders inside kite demo. So we've got all the static meshes here, and we're not bothered with lots of textures or materials and other files cluttering up the place. So all we've got now is static meshes, so that's really good. So it's a lot easier to find. Go ahead and choose any of these, but what I will do for demonstration purposes is I'll go ahead and choose the Scots Pine, click that and drag with left mouse button into foliage type up here. It should go yellow to show you can drop it there. And go ahead and choose a boulder, drop that in there, whichever one you want. We'll have a fern, drop that in there, and we'll have the grass. We'll drop that in there. As you can see, if you highlight them, they've all got a little tick in the checkbox. That means if you're painting, it's going to put down whatever static mesh is ticked. We only want the grass for now, so we'll uncheck the fern, the rock, and the tree. Go ahead and click on grass. That will bring down the options for that mesh, the foliage type. Leave this alone where it says mesh, because that's the one you selected. We don't need to take notice of that. And when you come down to painting, density is how many instances there will be created of that mesh in the given brush size. So the higher the density, the more instances you'll have. Radius is basically how many instances of that mesh, how far apart they'll be. So if we had 0, there'll be, and 100, that'll be quite a lot of grass, and there'll be each instance of a grass material will be quite close together. If you had it on 100, they'd be spaced out by 100 units, or it'd be quite some distance. It wouldn't be too much for grass, but 1,000 is the maximum. So density, we probably want to set on something like, we'll try 50 so we can see it. Radius, we'll have on, say, 25. Leave the scaling uniform alone. Then scale X, min and max values. 1 is, if you leave it on 1, it'll place your static mesh according to its actual size as the static mesh. So what you want to do, what minimum, it'll randomate when you put in grass down. If you put 0.5, it'll range between half the size to 1.5 to 1.5 times the size. It'll place different grass instances down between 0.5 to 1.5. It'll randomate it. So you'll have grass textures ranging from half the size to 1.5 times the size. It just gives a bit of variety, because obviously grass isn't all the same size. It just adds more variety to your level, and it'll be less obvious that it's the same mesh repeating. Leave vertex color by mask channel alone. You don't really want to set too much on the placement. Leave the Z offset alone. Make sure it's 0, 0, otherwise you'll get meshes floating in the air and whatnot. Have align to normal checked. Align max angle on 0. Random yaw, leave that checked. If you want, I recommend you leave that checked, because what it'll do, when it's putting down instances of the mesh you've selected, it will randomate, it will rotate, it will randomate the mesh according to your value, which means there'll all be random rotations, they'll all be differently randomly rotated, which is what we want, because obviously trees aren't all in the same direction. Sorry, grass, trees, whatever mesh you got, aren't all in the same direction. Random pitch angle, leave that alone on 0. Ground slope angle, make sure the min is on 0 and the max on 45. That means basically that if you've got like a slope going down the hill and you add a tree and you painted on that, it would actually appear unless the degree of the slope was more than 45 degrees. So if you set it on 90 and you had a hard straight drop on your terrain, that means it would paint the tree right on the side if you clicked paint on that surface, which would look unbelievable, tree sticking out of the side. So default value is fine. 45 degrees is the max we want to go for painting meshes. Leave the height on default. It should be some weird random minus number and max number. Leave it as it is, otherwise it might not render it might not show up. You start changing that value. Mobility, leave it on static. Cold distance, well, it does, you've got min and max values. Usually I like to set my cold distance for the meshes with a volume occlusion. I've got another tutorial on that on my YouTube channel if you want to go check that out. But if you don't want to use occlusion volume for your meshes, what you can do is set them into 0 and set the max to something like, I don't know, 15,000. Basically what I'll do when it gets a certain distance away, it won't render the object. It won't render grass anymore. So freeing up system resources, because when you're not near it, you don't need to see it and it doesn't need to be rendered. So go ahead and set it to 15,000 for now for demonstration purposes. You've got cast shadow. You can have that checked, but I wouldn't bother because you can have quite a lot of instances of grass. You don't want them all to cast shadow because it will severely slow down your game when you've got like a million grass instances. So tick shadow for grass, which is not necessary. You don't need grass to cast shadows. Then all these options become grayed out. Then on the collision presets, this is the collision type. Since it's grass and glass doesn't block your way in real life, we want to be able to walk through the grass. We'll make sure that's selected no collision, which it is by default. If you click custom, these options become highlighted and you can check all these different options like the pawn, the world dynamic, the camera, the visibility, the physics body, and whatnot. You can check, you can set them all individually to whether it should be ignore it, overlap, or block. But normally you just want to go on with grass is fine on no collision. It will do it all for you and it will set the properties accordingly to no collision. Leave custom navigatable geometry alone. Cast shadow as two-sided. That's fine to leave that alone. Receive decals. Decal, say a bullet hole when you shoot a gun as a decal. So we don't want grass having bullet holes in them because the texture it'd just be all wrong. The textures wouldn't really apply to the grass. They'll be sticking out all over the place and it'd just be really jarring. So leave decals alone for grass. If it was a tree or a rock, you'd want that checked. Light map type. I'm using a light propagation volume, so I'd want to check force volumetric. But if you're using UV light maps, which most people do when they bake their lighting, you want force surface. So I'll put on force volumetric because I'm using light propagation, dynamic lights. And then if you want, up here where we set the occlusion between min 0 and max 1500, if you want that, if it's not taking effect and you can't see it disappearing when you get so far away from it, that's because use occluder isn't checked by default. You want use as occluder, and that will make sure it uses the occlusion scale. Leave lighting channels alone and render custom depth paths alone. You don't need that. You don't need physics material. And scalability, where it says enable density scaling, if you've got meshes that aren't that important to the game and that's small and have no collision like grass, ferns, plants like that, go ahead and check that. But if you have detailed meshes like trees, foliage like trees and whatnot, you want to go ahead and disable that. So there you go. Now we set the properties for grass. We can we'll just make the brush size a little bit bigger, about 2,500. Now what we're going to do is we'll see what we get now when we after setting the options for grass. Can you see? I'm quite high up in the air, so if we get down to the ground, you can see we've now got grass. And if we get further away from it, it should all disappear because we've set the cull volume. See it disappearing? It's no longer rendering. Go ahead and play with the cull distance volume. Go ahead and play with the cull distance scales to get a look that you want. Because in the end, if you've got a large terrain, you probably will be having a couple of million instances of grass if you've got grass everywhere in your level. So you're going to want to set the cull distance either under the settings on your foliage type or using an occlusion volume under the volumes tab. I've got another tutorial for that, so I won't cover it here. Then what you want to do is we'll click on tree now. We'll set up the properties for tree. We'll just uncheck grass, and where on grass where it says 3.27k, it tells you how many instances of grass you've got laid out on your terrain. So we've got 3,270 instances of grass. We'll uncheck that because we just want to paint the tree singularly for a minute. And then click on it, so we've got the options. And then we do that again, and we'll set the individual options for the tree. Don't worry about the mesh. Painting, we'll have density on, say, 0.1, and the radius on 1,000, which is a maximum. We'll leave uniform alone for scaling. The scale X and min and max, that's the range how much it will randomate the different sizes again, like I said for the grass. So we probably want 0.8, no, we probably want 0.9 for the minimum, and for the maximum 1.4. And we'll leave placement alone. Make sure yours looks like this. The Z offsets on 0, the aligned normals on, the aligned max angles on 0, the random yaw for random rotation is on, because trees aren't all the same direction or all the same size. And make sure the rest looks like that. Make sure the millimeters is on static. And coal distance volume, we shall have 25,000 this time. This means when we place down the trees, when we move away from them, the grass will, well, I'll tell you what, that's not, we want the trees to disappear first. So we'll set that to 7,000, set to 9,000. So when you're moving away and everything starts occluding, the trees will disappear before the grass. Usually you probably want to keep it on the same. So we should set that to 15,000 really, which is what we'll do. And then we want trees to cast shadows because they're a big prop, a big mesh, and we want trees to cast shadows because it'll look better. If you've got like I have, light propagation, you can use, as long as cast shadows enabled, you can use effect indirect lighting, and it says controls whether the foliage should inject light into the light propagation volume. This flag is only used if cast shadows is true. You can only use that if you've got light propagation for your dynamic lights in your level, and cast shadow is true. Same for effect field light. And where it says cast dynamic shadow and cast static shadow, if you're using UVs baked into your light maps, you want to uncheck dynamic shadow and leave cast static shadow. If you've got light propagation volume, you want to make sure you haven't got cast static shadow selected, and the one you have got selected is cast dynamic shadow. But if you are using light maps and you have got this one selected, then you can click on light map resolution, and since trees are got lots of triangles, like 60,000 triangles per, 60,000 triangles on the polygons, you're probably going to want to set to the lowest at 4, so the computer works less hard, so you get a better frame rate in the end of the day. It's you're freeing up some resources. It doesn't make that much difference from 8 to 4, apart from you'll notice a significant increase in performance when you've got like hundreds of trees. So make sure if you're using baked maps, your light map resolution is on 4, which is the minimum. I'm going to go ahead and click back on cast dynamic shadow, turn that one off. Right, collision preset. Since this is a tree and we want to block our path, and bullets if we have guns and cars and whatnot, you want to check on no collision and make sure it's on block all, because we want our tree to have collision. That's fine. Then leave that alone. We can leave all this, but I'm going to use my light type as force volumetric. So I'm using light propagation. If you're using baked UVs, you want force surface, so I'll put force volumetric, leave the lighting channels alone and the render custom depth pass. Leave physics alone. And engine scalability, we want this unchecked because it's a large detailed mesh and it's quite important to the game. Now if we go ahead, make sure it's selected or it won't paint anything down. It paints down whatever is checked in the individual foliage type. So if I was to check all 4, it would paint all 4 down according to individual properties that you've set, leaving paint density on 1. But we only want the tree for now, so we'll go ahead and make sure that's selected, and we'll just see that. Look, the trees are different sizes, they're rotated, and they're rotated differently because we've set the min and max scale value under scale X, and we've left the random yaw pitch selected. So that's why we've got slightly different sized trees and different rotations for the trees. So we'll put some more trees over there, and over here, and just there, and maybe here. Now what we'll do, I'll just quickly go ahead and uncheck the trees. We'll click on rock, make sure that's highlighted, go ahead and set up there. And properties, we'll scroll down to, we'll want quite a big rock and we don't really want to randomate the size at the moment. We'll put 5 and 5, so it'll be 5 times as big and it'll be one size because we've got the min and max equal the same. And then cold distance, we'll have it on 15,000 at the max. We'll have cast shadows on. We'll turn static shadows off. We'll have collision on block all because it's a rock and we want to block the player if it makes sure it has collision. The last thing to set is density. We'll have it on 1 and radius on 750. Go ahead and put that down. There's still far too many. That'll be fine. Now we've got 40 instances of the rock. Now we'll set up our fern, last thing to do, and then we'll set it, leave mesh alone. Density we'll have on 20. Sorry, mesh density we'll have on 25. Radius 210. Minimum we'll have 0.5. The maximum 1.35. We'll leave that alone, leave all this alone. We don't want it to cast shadows because that'll just have a serious impact on performance. If you have got lots of instances placed and you're not using occlusion, we'll have cast shadow off. And since we want to be able to walk, the player wants to walk through it, and the pawns and whatever wants to walk, and what else, we'll go ahead and say make sure it's on no collision. It is by default on no collision. And then down here, since it's an unimportant mesh and it's small and it's hasn't got as many triangles as the tree and it's not that much of a complicated mesh, we can make sure enable density scaling is highlighted, is checked. I think there's just one more setting I want to. I think I'm missing something. Let's just go ahead and place it down, make sure it's checked or it won't happen. Let's show. As you can see, it's not placed anything down. I've still got the tree selected. Unselect that. There you go, now fern selected. That's why it wasn't putting it down. There you go. It puts it down. If we get closer to them, there'll be full detail. Because these meshes from Epic Games have got LODs on a level of detail. Meaning basically there's different model types for based on the distance you are far away from the object. So up close it'll be LOD 0, which is the full range of vertices and detail, and the further you get away you'll go to LOD 1, so it doesn't render as many triangles and the measure isn't quite as detailed because you can't really see it properly from that range. And I think it's got a LOD 2 which is even further away, it renders even less triangles. So now what we want to do, select tree, select rock, make sure fern selected and grass. Now when we paint, it will paint all those objects at the same time, the ones we've got selected. We've selected all 4. If we go ahead and paint like that, as you can see, it saves time. Just now we set up the individual properties, we shouldn't have a problem. Everything should be nicely spaced apart. So we can just and there you go. That is terrain painting. Just give my engine a second to unfreeze. As you can see, you've now got foliage. If we go ahead and right click and choose play from here, we'll play from that spot we've just chosen. We'll go into the game. We're just a loose camera flying around at the moment, but we can go across. Obviously you can spend a lot of time on this and get it just the way you want to. I'm just doing it quickly for tutorial purposes. But as you can see, it looks pretty good. Well, that's it for today's tutorial YouTube. If you've liked what you've seen or it's been useful at all, please comment, like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching and have a great
Foliage.